Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're super excited to have you here. We'll just allow a couple minutes here for everyone to get joined, but while we're waiting, I'd love if you want to drop in the chat where you're calling in from. I am here in wonderful Denver, Colorado. Awesome. Florida, Connecticut,
Awesome.
Montreal. All right. Michigan, Cheyenne, lovely place. I actually was just in Michigan, so awesome to see some Michiganders joining.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love Michigan.
Got
See
another
you
one
in
from
Colorado. All
Washington.
right, Washington. Man, that's just so amazing about the United States. It's just so big and has there's some things that tie us all together, but then there's some unique parts of the country. And I love that we get to all come together on this webinar.
Luke from the America's finest city, San Diego. All right, awesome. Well, while we just give another minute here, maybe to kind of get the conversation going and leading into today's webinar, I'd love if you guys have any awesome tips you want to share with anybody regarding hiring, your onboarding process, engagement. Another Michigander, go Lions. Oh, I hate to admit I'm a Packers fan. I'm originally from Wisconsin, so. All right, awesome. So we're about 3 minutes in here. So we're going to go ahead and go Bears. Oh, no. Yes, Jen, thank you. Another Packers fan. All right, awesome. We'll go ahead and get started here. All right, again, thank you everyone for joining. For today's webinar, I'm Samantha. I'm a customer success manager here with Recognize. And today we have Dr. Christina Moran with us as our wonderful guest speaker. And then we have Alex Grande. So to start things off, I want to introduce Alex Grande. He's the CEO and co-founder of Recognize. He's been leading Recognize for the past 10 years, helping companies bring recognition into everyday work and transform culture at a scale. He's worked with hundreds of teams. He's also published research on social cognition and is truly passionate about the power of positive reinforcement. He's here to just share how platforms like Recognize can really help put today's strategies into action. So let's give a warm welcome to Alex.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining. I see 77 now in the webinar, so it's awesome to have you. Super honor to have you. So just a couple things. We'll get right into the webinar. Just would love to plug Recognize as it's an employee recognition and rewards platform to help companies recognize and reward their company, their staff, their culture, right? And when we love to be with people that we love to work with, things are a lot better. And we know that as a fact, right? So we're talking more about that in the webinar and hiring. But if you ever want to learn more about peer-to-peer recognition, nominations, anniversaries, rewards internationally, let's set up a call. The QR code there is schedule a call. We have a number of ways to reach out to us in the future of this webinar. So thanks for having us.
Thank you, Alex. And before we really dive in here, I'd love to hear from everyone. And I'd love to know, every organization's hiring funnel looks different. So I want to start with a quick poll. I want to know, when you think about your hiring funnel right now, where do you feel your biggest pain point is? Do you have too many applicants? Are your interviewing scheduling delays, meeting candidate expectations, attracting top talent? Are you struggling with identifying the right skills and the right fit or other? Right. So we'll leave that poll up here. Can everyone see that okay? All right, so Alex, what are you thinking?
You know, I didn't know. I didn't think about it this time. Last time I thought about it in last webinar beforehand, and you know, it was nice to predict it, but I was just open-ended, just thinking what were people going to say. And I think it's so interesting to see that it's around the top talent, which is that quality component. It's not necessarily time to hiring, it's that quality, which I think is very telling. And that ties into the second one as well. The right skills, right fit also ties into quality. So I think people are okay taking time to find the right candidate as long as it's the top quality, but you know, getting there before the competition does.
Yeah, and I see in the chat here, you know, others are struggling with that AI component.
The noise, there's just so much noise. What about you, Christina?
Yeah, I agree. I have heard, I think it depends a little bit on what your organization is and how big your employer brand is. From the people I hear of that are getting a lot of AI fake candidates, it's some of the bigger, more well-known organizations, whereas some of the smaller organizations, they might be dealing with some of the things that bubble to the top in that poll, such as attracting talent before the competition or finding the right skills and fit in the candidates that they do have. So it might be segmented a little bit by company size as well.
Great points. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for those insights. So now let's begin and start talking about the hiring journey. We talk about speed is always, you know, being timely is a pressure point for talent acquisition teams. And Alex, I would love to know what's one immediate action organizations can take today to meaningfully accelerate their time to hire without compromising quality.
Yeah, I really feel it's having the candidates ready even before there's a job position, right? That's having what I believe is important, a registry of referrals, right? So I would love to see people put a thumbs up in the webinar here if you have a referral program. I'm just curious if you already have one set up. A lot of times the referral program, you know, involves, okay, now we have this position. If they're hired, we'll give, you know, a certain amount of reward incentive. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up. It seems like, you know, probably a majority of people have them. You know, I'd be curious to see, you know, in looking at that data, how many of the, do you have a registry already? So I would start to capture that as early as possible. You know, really incentivize your, you know, your employees, you know, use your network, right, to, you know, be constantly asking people when they meet someone interesting, say, hey, who's the best marketer you know? And you know, if they can bring a referral once a month, just even if they're not even looking, maybe this person already has a role. You know, and I often case the high quality candidates already are working somewhere, as we all know. But if you can create that network, and you can use, I think, like Workday and things like that to track these things. If you don't, like, we use Notion internally, we use Notion as our wiki, and that is how you can, you know, track those referrals. I think another important thing to be considering, especially in relation to that poll, is doing that salary survey. You know, looking at your competitors. You know, what are they paying? You know, paying a little bit more can get that top talent in, that quality of life as well. You know, you know, obviously there's easier flow of information when everyone's in the office, but it's 2025. People want to work at home partly, and the best talent want that flexibility. They want to be able to be there for their families, right? People are looking for flexibility, you know, especially with the Gen Z. We're looking for more flexibility. But if you're still hiring for high quality A players, so to speak, doesn't matter where they're working, right? As long as you have the right systems in place to be able to take care of that. And when, as an HR team, for the HR folks on the call, you know, if you were able to really move the needle on, you know, better hiring methods, documenting them, I mean, the CEO will take notice on that. So I just am a big believer that birds of feather flock together. So, you know, you really want to push that referral program and have those people ready to talk to even before the role is ready.
Great. Yeah, those are some great points. I love that little quote at the end, you know, great people attract great people. So awesome points. And, you know, obviously this is one part of the equation. Finding the right person for the role is almost kind of what makes or breaks the hire. So when you're evaluating your talent, what signals or indicators give you that confidence that you've really found not just a strong candidate, but the right person for the role and the business long term?
Definitely. I mean, one thing that's shared across departments, because you know specific questions you'll ask in the interview process will be different for each role a lot of times. But then there's the company values, and that's the kernel of your organization. On the values, they drive every decision to success, right? And so again, I love to see a thumbs up if you feel you have great company values, and thumbs down if you feel like your values could use some work. You know, I was on a call earlier today with an organization. It was a credit union, and you know their values were, you know, innovation, caring, right? And I saw, okay, like will you actually hire and fire on innovation if you're a customer success rep at a credit union, for instance? You know, so you want to have company. I've seen a lot of thumbs up, which I'm super stoked. You know, it's awesome. You guys are, you know, it's great to have companies with great values that you're living and breathing and actually firing on them. You know, you take the value and you say, and I'll fire you if you don't have that. Right? Like that's how serious it is. Don't worry, nobody's jobs are at risk. I'm just saying, you know, you got to take it that seriously, and it's okay to reevaluate them. Okay, I saw my first thumbs down there. So not everybody, but most people are feeling good about their values, which is fantastic. Use those in the hiring process if you're not already. It's so important to do that. You know, if you're a small company of under 20 people, you can oftentimes get by without necessarily having values, because the people you're hiring are so passionate and dedicated, and you know they're hippos in themselves already. But then when you start growing, and your first 5 predict your next 50 and your next to your next 500, right? You want that staying power in your culture, which is why being able to hire on those values, and you have those questions in your score sheet, tying into the values to the questions. You're not literally asking someone, are you an ally? Are you, not a jerk, right? You find those out through more clever questions, obviously. And I'm going to talk, maybe we'll talk more about AI in later questions, but I will mention that there's tools like Eightfold, for instance, Eightfold.ai, that can test on values as well, in the filtering process. I just want to say, kind of a side note, I think that, regardless of what our core values are now, resourcefulness is such a key attribute, right? Someone who's resourceful has a can-do attitude. They are a high performer, people who get in there, figure it out, and are resourceful. And I think we all know that mediocrity can drive away excellence, right? So you want to keep that high quality, in doing so first and foremost through the values, and also again through the referrals, making sure the candidates that you're working with are ones that already have and care about things that you care about. So those are a couple of the things that I think are important to really driving home the signals.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with you. Values are the foundation of everything you do, right? I'm sure a lot of us can relate and have felt the frustration of working with somebody who doesn't share those same values, or, doesn't share that same motivation. So definitely understand there, Alex. Great points. And, when we're talking about the role itself, hiring managers definitely play a critical role here as well. And we want to, sometimes that clarity has to start well before the interview process. What guidance can you share with hiring managers to help them define roles with greater clarity and alignment, so that the process sets both the candidate and the team up for success?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to, again, I'm trying to hit home on some basics that maybe you're already doing, but how successful are we in these things, and can we be better? I think about just just refining our craft more and more, even again with the core basics that can really drive really future positive change. I mentioned scorecard earlier for hiring, where each column is a different candidate, right? And then you have your values along the rows. But having a scorecard with your team, every department should have a scorecard, a weekly scorecard that you're measuring with data. How successful are you in certain things? What is the delta change between how many referrals have you gotten, or the time to hire period? If you have a goal for the quarter of time to hire, 20 days, well, where are you at now each week, right? There's an analogy. If you're flying a plane, when I saw someone in Miami, I'm in Seattle, so if I was flying to Miami and I checked once the entire flight, whether I'm on track or not, I'm not going to be landing in Miami. So that's why planes constantly are checking where you're going, and you want to be doing that as well. So one thing, and then you can run experiments around these data points to see if you can move the needle on these initiatives. One thing I think is important is clarity of role. And that comes back down to that job description you put out on Indeed or wherever you're posting jobs, right? If you look at Indeed and you look at job descriptions, a lot of time they're generic. It seems like there's one company copies another. And if you're a small org versus a large org or what you're doing, I mean, every job description should be very unique. And it should be, that is your roadmap for success for the next year. It's an internal document, the job description. It's not just some, put it out there on the internet, put out as a grocery list. How many job descriptions have you seen that are basically just a list of, items or grocery lists? If I just hand someone a list of ingredients, one person's going to make a casserole, another person's making lasagna. What I mean? You want to really make your job descriptions be paragraph form and talk about what is success at 30 days, 3 months, 6 months, a year. How many times have you gone into interview and you come out and then you're hiring again, like the previous marketing example, one person thinks they're a growth marketer, another person thinks they're a content strategist, another person thinks a product marketer, right? And then you're back to square one, time wasted. So I really like to have those job descriptions be very detailed, multi-pages, and people don't read job descriptions. Sure, have a synopsis, cliff notes to the top, right? Too short to read, so to speak. But then if they get the interview, they're going to read that, and if they haven't, you'll notice in the first interview, and that's an easy out. So I think it's coming back to the basics there, and be honest of what it's like to work at your organization. You want to attract the right people to your organization. Be honest of who you are, what it's like to work there, and I think also just asking early around references. Who would you have as a reference? We're not at that stage yet, but who would you have as a reference? And I think we all know that high quality employees are going to refer their previous managers rather than a peer. So I think, really coming back to the basics on the job description and making those really stellar can help with the hiring managers defining the role.
Exactly. That's awesome. Really setting those clear expectations. And then another factor that really shapes the hiring process is how recruiters themselves are incentivized. It's kind of been a longstanding debate. And in your view, what's the best way to structure recruiter compensation so it drives the right outcomes as well for both candidates and companies?
Yeah, I mean, you want to have trust between the hiring manager and the recruiter. And you build trust by bringing great candidates to the hiring manager, right? And one problem is commissions. I'm going to say it, like having commission for your talent acquisition team, your recruiters, it's just they're incentivized to bring the wrong people possibly. Yes, you can create guardrails where the person has to be at the organization for so long, and then you get a additional commission or something like that. That might work. It's just then there's no more process, more delay, things like that. I just prefer just to pay people what they deserve in that team. And look, the bottom line is if that person is top talent recruiter, right, they themselves are ideal for their organization, they're going to go out and they're going to find people who are the best candidates naturally because they have that innate motivation, right, which is so critical. And I also think, and then just coming back to just getting the right data and making sure that, what are the company values? What's the hiring manager's team values? Because I think we have different philosophies to do different types of jobs. So I think really understanding and having the questions, the initial questions, tie into some of that. Yes, in the screening calls, we can ask technical questions for those technical roles. I'm not saying replace any kind of specific role-based questions. I'm just saying also make sure that, again, if your value is be an ally, a teammate is important to you, have a couple questions for that even in the screening process. So I think that those things can really help.
Super interesting point. Sometimes it's you're rushing to get all these people in, and to me, it's not about quantity, it's about quality, right? So I think that's a really important point as well. And finally, this was also brought up in the chat. I know this was a struggle for some of you with the poll. We can't ignore one of the biggest disruptors, artificial intelligence. From sourcing to screening, definitely it's a game changer in today's market. So with AI transforming nearly every part of the hiring process, what's been your experience with AI-driven sourcing platforms, and what advice can you give to organizations looking to leverage them effectively?
Yeah, I mean, it's still an easy industry. We're still 1-2 years off for it to be, totally stellar. I think we've all, seen the incredible power it has. Even going back to the job description point, using just right now going into the GPT and adding in that kind of extra language where you say, hey, write as if you are this persona, right? And really tailor just using Gen AI to help you with great job descriptions. It's so easy to use, and then you see the power of it, but then you start trying to use it for more complicated problems, and then you discover, oh, this is actually, there's some issues here. A lot of my experience the last year is really around honestly the coding side, and then hooking up Claude or and other types of Gen AI, using I think a phrase we're going to hear more and more, MCP servers. MCP is this idea of being able to take things like our program recognize, or maybe it's again, I mentioned Workday earlier, Paylocity, and hooking that up to a Claude or a ChatGPT where you actually can start chatting with these tools. So that's where I've been more my focus, but I've been hearing a lot and talking to a lot of people in the industry around these like structured situational judgment tests, which are basically just kind of gamified questions. And I think this is, where, there is idea, you interview, you ask these questions, people often lie. 57% of time, people have lied on their skills, either on their resume. Number of studies have shown somewhere between 40 and 50% on lying on resumes and or on their skills. So, that's why they started doing homework assignments. But how annoying is it to make people do free work? Whenever we hire team members, we hire them as a contractor, we pay them to do that work. But that can be costly to at scale and very time consuming, these kind of homework assignments. That's where there's tools like Harvard. I really think Harvard, they've been doing acquisitions. I think a lot about biases as well. I'm concerned about AI biases. We've heard about these types of things. It can be, to me, very scary, honestly, when you have AI that you feel like you trust, and then it has biases. So Harvard actually I'm not, by the way, have any connection to these companies I'm mentioning. I would like you to check out Recognize. But other than that, I'm just telling you what I find really interesting in the market. So Harvard has third-party assessments for them, and there's also a tool I mentioned, Eightfold, as well. Eightfold, I think .ai, and they they can mask, which is interesting. They can mask the name, the address, the photo, all the information, and judge them based off of skills sorting. And I can put some of these links in a second into the chat. I think these can really help. I also, up and coming one, more affordable, I think it's like $200 a month, is Lightspace, LITE space.io. Another AI, skills sorting solution as well. But yeah, Harvard's cool because it asks questions, situational questions. And I think instead of doing a homework assignment, you can then have them do maybe these questions where each one can get harder as well. You can also somewhat make these manually using something like a Typeform or SurveyMonkey, where each question, has a, right or wrong answer essentially. But, people can rely on things like that. That's where something more sophisticated AI can help. And I just want to close on the idea that, in that Jim Collins' book, again, going back to basics, I think it was written in the 90s at this point, but Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, how, that good is the enemy of great, right? And sometimes you can just be going along with the emotions and things are good. All the great stories, all the great success stories happen because something bad happens. And then, so, you have to go after the great. So I always just kind of look to see, okay, what parts of the business use that scorecard, what things are, red, but also what things are yellow too. What things that we should double click on. It may not include AI right now. It all depends on what your problems are the most now. But yeah, definitely sorting if you have overabundance or that filtering of AI. You're having to deal with AI candidates. You got to fight AI of AI essentially. That would be a great usage there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of your insights. I'm definitely going to have to pick up that book. I always need some new reading material. So I really appreciate everything, Alex. And now that we kind of explored the hiring side of the equation, we want to shift into kind of what happens after the hiring, going into the onboarding and engagement. And I'd love to hear from everybody again. So I'm just going to go into another quick poll. And I want to know, which of the following would you feel has the biggest impact on hiring at your organization? So again, we'll leave this up and give you guys a minute or so to put your answers through. And I do want to let everyone know we will have a live audience Q&A at the end of the webinar. So we'll leave some time for that. So feel free, any questions you may have throughout the webinar, to drop those in the Q&A chat. So clearer structure with the 30, 60, 90-day plan. I know Alex touched on that. Micro-learning modules with buddy systems for a faster ramp, manager playbooks with built-in recognition prompts, embedding a recognition into everyday workflows or other. Feel free to drop that in the chat as well. All right. So structure 30, 60, 90 days seems to be the leader right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's the last 3 webinars we've done, that's the most telling survey we've done. I mean, look at that. Not to say that the other ones aren't important. 20% on the bottom 2 around playbooks. I think playbooks ties into not just for recognition, but in general, that ties into the clear structure. Yeah. Christina, any thoughts on that from you? Otherwise,
Yeah, I mean, I think it ties in with what I see, which is a lot of people just find that old Word document of their onboarding plan from the last time they brought in an employee, dust it off a little bit, maybe tweak a couple things, and then fire it off, and that's the onboarding plan they use. There's not a lot of decision tree or decision mapping that goes on to customize the employee experience. It's just a little bit of like, this is what's worked. Let's just keep doing it unless it doesn't work anymore for some reason. And that's partially efficiency, right? And that's just partially not being as innovative or improvement minded in that function.
yeah,
Yes,
and I just to double click on what Amy said in the chat. I think it's all about holistic, right? It's all about holistic. And that's what can be overwhelming, though, is when you feel like you have to do so many different things. I think that's why mapping it out and having it, all structured in one place can help kind of cut through the noise. But I agree that it is holistic.
absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating in that poll. And I'm excited to introduce our next speaker here, Dr. Christina Moran. She's an award-winning psychologist and a leading expert in sustainable behavioral change. She's also coached leaders and rising talent at organizations ranging from mid-sized firms to Fortune 100s. And she's had proven impact across leadership, people operations, organizational effectiveness, and even areas like marketing and global collaboration. She's also a published thought leader with her research appearing in top journals and as well as Harvard Business Review. So welcome, Christina. So great to have you. I know Alex shared some excellent insights on the hiring process. I'd want to expand on that just a little bit and talk about what it takes to scale talent acquisition while keeping teams energized and effective. So from your perspective, we'd love to know how an organization can scale talent acquisition without overloading their teams.
Yep, definitely. I think it's a common challenge, especially with a growing organization, as I know a couple folks had noted in the chat. There's humans and there's machines, right? You have to really employ one or both or some combination of the two in order to make that engine work as effectively as it can. And you're dealing with human beings on the other end of that equation. So there's only so much you can take the human element out of it. I know some organizations have had success adding in things like one-way interviews, recorded interviews, things like that, skills assessments, similar to what Alex was mentioning, all those kinds of pieces and parts that help improve the quality of hire while hopefully not diluting that human touch too much. And I think that that's what many organizations are trying to find the balance on, right? Is how can we keep that human touch strong? Because as humans looking for jobs, that's what we want. We want to feel treated like a human being and not just a number, but also be efficient and make the best use of our time. And if we're not the right fit, tell us that early on so we don't spend as much time investing in an organization that it really isn't going to pan out. So from a scaling perspective, I think it's going to be a combination of those two things. In recruiting, I view it as very aligned with the sales function of an organization. Maybe that word isn't the best representation, but the approach is very similar, right? You're qualifying leads, you're trying to find a match between an individual and a role. And so there are similarities in those approaches. And if you think about the best organizations from a sales standpoint, they still typically have human beings doing the selling, right? There's still maybe some layer of marketing involved. Typically, that's the case. And there may be that layer on the employer branding side from a hiring standpoint. But you can't ever really take the human element completely out of it. One, because that may not lead to the best hiring outcomes. And two, because again, that candidate experience matters. That's the beginning of their relationship with your firm, potentially, unless they've been a consumer or a supplier of your firm in the past. And so keeping part of that human element in as much as you can probably while being efficient is still really important. So I view it as a blend between those two, and the specific combination is going to depend a little bit on the industry, the size of the organization, et cetera.
Yeah, that's great. It's always hard to find that balance between it, kind of that yin and yang, right?
Exactly.
And of course, hiring is just the first step. Once you have that talent and that right person in the door, now we get into another challenge, onboarding. And, with Gen Z entering the workforce, I believe Labor Bureau said by 2030, 30% or higher is going to be Gen Z. That's kind of taken over the workforce. Companies really have to rethink their entire onboarding architecture. So talking about that, what new approaches are you seeing in onboarding design today? How are companies adapting to meet those expectations of the new generation coming in, and which strategies are proving most effective for scaling as well?
Definitely. So I always like to start the generational conversation by just saying the research, while the pop culture kind of sentiment around generations is attractive and exciting, there's always more variation between or within, I should say, a generation than between generations. So if you take a group of baby boomers, for example, there's more variation among those individuals who all happen to be in the baby boomer generation than there is between baby boomers and Gen Z, for example. So it's a really broad brush to be painting with. And a lot of the psychological research shows that any generation, new generation entering the workforce has kind of been treated the same way. So millennials, when they entered, it was like, oh gosh, first generation to grow up with the computer. What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And the reality is, again, at the very fundamental level, they're all human. We all want, roughly the same things. We want to feel fulfilled at work, challenged, have meaningful relationships with our colleagues, so on and so forth. What I'm seeing, though, in this specific group of individuals who's coming out of university or entering the workforce for the first time, a lot of them went through those COVID years, right? And so they were very isolated. They have a lot of feelings about that, of course, in terms of what that means from how they want to connect with people going forward. To Alex's point, like the remote hybrid office conversation is a big conversation among that group. And again, I don't think you're going to find one set point just because all those individuals identify with that generation. I actually see a lot of Gen Z who ask if the company is in the office because they want to be in the office. And I'm not saying that because I'm endorsing like return to office broadly for every company or anything like that. It really depends, though, and it depends on whether there's compatibility between the way your office is set up and what those candidates want. So, for example, if they're on Zoom calls or whatever virtual calls all day long, yeah, they're probably going to want to be at home where they're comfortable. Or if they're not really interacting with people, they'd probably rather be at home where they're comfortable and can go to their own kitchen and their own restroom and so on and so forth. But if there's meaningful engagement happening in your office with physical human beings, not behind a screen, and mentoring and lots of learning going on, then that might be really exciting for them. My experience is just they don't want that judgment made for them in a lot of cases. They want to be able to exert their judgment if they're feeling sick, or if I'm in Cleveland, there's a snowstorm and it's not really safe to be driving in, things like that. Like they want to be able to use that judgment that they've honed over many, many decades, trying to figure out the best thing for them. So from an onboarding design standpoint, what I see is that what they're looking for is really similar to what past generations have been looking for coming into the workforce. They want a clear connection between somebody who's experienced, who's going to teach them, and themselves, right? They have a lot of questions. They learned how to do things by the book, so to speak, possibly not from an experiential standpoint. They want that experiential piece. If they do feel like that relational piece is important to them, they're going to want that relational piece. They don't want to just be kind of shoved at their desk in the corner. They may want things like luncheons or opportunities to connect with colleagues that are a little more casual and not necessarily task focused. And new people coming into an organization generally all want that, right? It's kind of hard to come into a new environment and make friendships and connections. So again, I don't think this is unique to Gen Z, but they're kind of all going through it roughly the same time. So those are some of the pieces that I see, and I think strong onboarding design principles still apply. So thinking about what you're doing, making it meaningful, kind of starting with the relational piece as the headline if you can, as much as you can. Obviously, there's compliance things that have to happen early on, but I would make that first, few days at least, if not first week, be heavily relationally focused. And I don't mean that like you have to overbook them 8 hours a day in meetings, getting to know people, but the emphasis on getting to know the people they work with, forming meaningful connections, having people that they can ask questions of, and then starting to ramp up more on the technical side of things and the project knowledge and the ways that they're going to contribute to your organization. That those are things that typically still apply.
Awesome. Great points. And how do you feel buddy check-ins kind of fit into the onboarding process?
Yeah, so buddy check-ins, peer partner program, whatever we want to call it. It's a great way to just designate somebody that person knows I can go to. And again, kind of take off that hesitance or that intimidation, or what I see is a lot of people who are entering the workforce for the first time or in that early career area, they tend to like self-edit or hold themselves back, we'll say, from asking questions because they don't want to bother people, right? That's what I hear all the time. I don't want to bother somebody. And it's like, well, you're trying to find the tools and resources you need to do your job. So I think that they want you to come ask them if you need something, if you're stuck. Certainly over time, they want you to show that you're trying to use your independent judgment and be a little bit resourceful and use the tools that you've been given. But if you haven't been taught how to do something, then obviously you need to be able to do that. So those experienced folks, those are probably the most in-demand people in your organization. They might be managers. They might be leading some of the most important projects in your organization. So that's where the challenge comes in, is they can't always have the time that they would like to mentor. And so having a peer partner, not necessarily to learn how to do your job from or how to do everything from, but like, hey, that weird question of like, I noticed that everybody's parking over here and I thought I was parking in the right spot. Like, am I parking in the right spot, or whatever it might be for your organization? You know, those are things that they can go ask that person to, and just kind of be given a pass of like, you don't need to ask permission. I know why you're asking. I know why you're coming to me. Like, you can ask me those things. And usually organizations do a great job of picking who those peer partners or those buddies are, because they know those people generally have good judgment, are going to point them in the right direction, aren't going to make them feel bad, all those important things. So whether it's proactive, I mean, I like to kind of suggest an introduction at the beginning and make sure that people are getting together and meeting on that first day and spending a few minutes together, so that the relationship at least has a formal start. But then from there, it can be more prescriptive or more just reactive, depending on what works for your organization. But it's really important, because again, pulling people into the relationships and the community of your organization is a really big piece of them feeling like they made the right decision by coming there.
Absolutely. Those are great points. I love that. And, you know, of course, the learning doesn't stop at the onboarding, right? We also want to think about how can we scale knowledge across a growing company. And I know playbooks was dropped in the chat by a few people here. And, you know, those playbooks exist. It's all about keeping them fresh and accessible to everyone. Definitely is going to benefit. What's the most effective way to share knowledge across teams when we're talking about playbooks? You know, using tools like Notion or other platforms? And how often should those be updated and stay relevant? I know you had, you know, we dust off the old onboarding book, you know.
Exactly. When we need to is probably a lot of people's answer here. But I would say there's no wrong way to do it, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a certain way. I do hear a lot of organizations use Notion. I've never personally used it. If that works for your organization, awesome. There's so many different things that can be done, right? Some organizations are large enough, they invest in a learning management software. Other organizations, it might be standard operating procedures, Word documents, checklists, things like that. Again, I don't think there's any wrong way to do it. I just think if there's a way to help people remove from the millions of decisions they're making in a day, right? Like, we're all overloaded. We all have a lot going on. And so if you think about it that way, like, what decisions can I help somebody make effectively, or not spend as many cognitive resources on, because then they can, you know, direct those cognitive resources to things that are more challenging and do require more attention. Those are generally good things to do. So whether that's a checklist, again, if it's a standard operating procedure, which is just kind of a fancy word for like a list of how you do something, instructions, if you will. If it's Notion, if it's SharePoint, you know, Microsoft, if you're a Microsoft organization, they have Stream, where you can upload videos and kind of like make bare bones, if you will, learning management system, maybe without a ton of like centralized reporting. There's a lot of ways that people get creative about doing these things. So there's no wrong way to do it. In terms of updates, I think it's really important that there is somebody who is checking on it fairly often. So like, if there's a bunch of peers that are updating it, then what can happen is then maybe it's not up to date anymore, or somebody overwrote some important information or put in a way that's really more of a judgment call. That's not necessarily the way to do it. It's just that person's way. So it does help to have a champion in each area. That's going to take some time. And to me, it's one of those tasks where it's important, like it needs to get done, but it's not urgent. Nobody's banging down your door asking for it to be updated usually. And those are the types of tasks that I like to put a quarterly reminder or a monthly reminder on my calendar for, because otherwise it's been 6 months or a year or longer than that, and you haven't checked on it, and then all of a sudden somebody's doing something that you're not understanding why they're doing it that way, and it seems incorrect. And then they're like, oh, well, the document says to do it this way. So you can certainly be reactive in that way, and that's not wrong. But if you can just kind of put a regular reminder on for whomever that champion is to check in on those, that can usually be pretty helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you touched base with, and that's kind of one of the huge struggles, right? Everybody's very, very busy. And sometimes they don't have time for those things, which kind of brings me into that the big shift in learning and development right now, and it is micro learning. Those more frequent trainings that fit naturally. And, for those who may not be familiar with microlearning, could you maybe explain a little bit more on that? And in your experience, how does this contribute to accelerating productivity and engagement?
Yeah, definitely. So micro-learning is just a fancy kind of intimidating word for like short bursts of learning, if you will. I think we're all probably most familiar with it when we've like Googled a YouTube video of how to do something that maybe takes a few minutes. So whether it's like how to do something in Excel, or how to, even if you think about doing something around your house, how to do something around your house. That's what micro-learning is. It's very narrow. It's focused on usually just one specific task, if you will. It's not more general like anti-harassment or inclusivity or something like that, which is much more broad and can be kind of personalized to the organization a bit. So I personally see microlearning work great in technological types of environments. So organizations that I've seen, whether they have a specific type of software that they use or something that's really particular about the way something occurs in a program, that microlearning can be great because they need to know, the employee needs to know how to do that specific thing at that specific moment. They don't need the hour-long overview of how to get started in whatever program they're in or the advanced version of that. They just really are stuck on one particular task. Certainly they could go ask a human being that works at your organization, that's a possibility, or obviously use an AI function that's out there that maybe can help them with that. And that may even be a connector of them to some of those micro-learning resources that are available more broadly. But I would say if you have things that happen in your organization that are probably technologically based and or very specific, then microlearning might be the way to address it. And you could even make little pieces of microlearning that all compile into a series if somebody did want to go through it on a more like linear basis. But the whole point is that like nobody's journey is exactly the same. And so being able to pull out just that one little snippet that you need at that moment, microlearning is a great ability to do that. And when you do that, you're enabling employees to be more independent, to be more self-sufficient, to maybe actually see how it's done and how it should look on their screen, which is wildly important from a technological standpoint. And people generally like to be independent. So when you're enabling them to do that and feel empowered, like, oh, I figured this out on my own, it can be a self-esteem boost. It can make them feel good about the resources their organization has, which can have all kinds of other positive effects.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. And, you can also throw in that micro learning with your 30, 60, 90-day structure, right? And then give those shout outs or those recognitions when they hit those milestones and finish those little micro learnings. Gallup found that employees who are frequently recognized see a 14% boost in productivity. And, those highly engaged teams, they actually achieve a 21% greater productivity overall as well.
Love that.
Now, all of this, the hiring, onboarding, learning, it all ladders up to, culture and values. When all of those are aligned, it becomes real. It's for organizations, Christina, who might not have a recognition platform or any existing platforms to kind of tie all this in together. How can they really set that tone for a recognition first culture and really drive home those values? I know Alex touched on that as well.
Yep, definitely. So what I would say is a couple different things there. So one, is it in your values? And your values are the most important behaviors at your organization, in my opinion, right? So if there's not something in your values that points to appreciation, recognition, acknowledgement, whatever it might be, then people aren't going to prioritize it. So that's not to say that that applies to everybody, but that's a consideration that I would immediately just want to mention. Also, related to Alex's point, one of my favorite quotes by one of my good friends is, your culture is defined by the worst behavior you accept. And how many of us are accepting cultures that there's a lot of criticism, there isn't a lot of support or upliftingness going on. There's psychological research that shows that it takes 5 positive statements or 5 pieces of praise to every 1 piece of negative feedback or criticism to counteract that psychologically for a person. So negative feedback or criticism has 5 times the weight that we put on praise or nice things that people say to us. And honestly, this was hammered home. I took my daughter to a Disney concert a couple weeks ago, and there were so many uplifting messages, like to the point where I'm tearing up. They're telling these kids, you can do anything, you can be anything, like all these really nice things. And I'm like, gosh, I forgot that that's how childhood was. And like, people don't do that anymore. They're just always coming and asking for what they need or pointing out what was maybe a little bit incorrect about something. And so I think I would ask you first, like, where does your organization stand on that? Do a little bit of soul searching and thinking about that, because it's not enough to just slap a word on a wall. And is it something that we're going to reinforce in our day-to-day and uphold, especially our most senior leaders too, right? Because like sometimes we give our senior leaders a pass on values because we're like, oh, they're busy, or oh, they're doing really important things for the company. And it's like, it's kind of like a parent in the home, in the sense of like, they need to be setting the example. You can't just be saying this is important and not spending any time on it, because if you don't, nobody else in your organization will either. So I see all those things as being very tied together, but also, like all values, you need to be authentic in your organization too.
Absolutely. And, SHRM, also another just fact I want to put out there, recognition programs with that, organizations with recognition programs do see a 41% increase in employee engagement as well. So I'm all about giving those shout outs and, starting early on from the onboarding process, setting that precedence from the very beginning. Awesome. Well, Christina, thank you so much for joining us today and all your insights. We do have a few questions here that we're going to get into. And, I'd love if you could share just a couple thoughts here, or some of your tips. How can, I know we talked about quality, right? When we're talking about speeding up the hiring process. How do you do that without sacrificing?
Yeah, so my lens is probably going to be different than Alex's, but coming from a psychological background, I firmly believe that you can tailor a really strong, effective assessment, and that can help really inform you on your quality of hire. So a little bit of my background, I used to do fitness for duty assessments of police and fire candidates. That's high stakes, right? CEOs as well in that role. Those are high stakes roles. And so you have to get those right. You get those wrong and people's lives are at stake. And so like what we're doing in a corporate environment certainly isn't that cutthroat, if you will. But obviously there's a way to make sure that your candidates are going to work out better than perhaps people are right now. And it's just because that experience isn't there, that expertise, and the way that they're approaching it maybe isn't as focused on those outcomes as it could be.
Awesome. Great. And our next question here, how can a TA leader build trust with the hiring managers within their organization, or have that, have that autonomy to say, hey, this is the right candidate, without, slowing down the hiring process?
Alex, do you want to take that one, or would you like me to?
No, go for it. I think I tried to touch on that with the values, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah. So for me, all great relationships, or all great, all trust starts with great relationships. And so getting to know the other person, not just treating it as like a customer service transaction, really letting the hiring manager know that you're there to support them and their goals, not just fill a seat. Not just do something that ends up getting you a bonus or a commission or something like that. So I'm a firm believer in getting to know other people and their goals and objectives first, because that forms the foundation for trust. And then, of course, doing what you say you're going to do is hugely important. If you're not going to meet a goal or a deadline or a commitment, you need to own that. You need to just simply say, hey, I know we said we are going to meet this by this date. Unfortunately, that's not going to work out. Here's my plan for what we're going to do to adjust going forward. Are you comfortable with this? You know, just really taking that accountability is huge. And then communicating is very, very important. A lot of people think their job is to put their head down, do their work, and bother other people as little as possible. And that has unintended consequences of people not knowing the status of things. So I always like to think about, how can I make this easy for the person? Let them know, here's where I'm at, here's what's going on. I don't need anything from you, or here's a decision we need to make. Here's my proposed approach for that. Like, be direct, make it easy for them to know what's going on. Don't make them hunt around for information or what the status is. Those are all things that breed trust.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you have to build that relationship with everyone, including the candidates, correct, right? Now, this next question is very specific to a particular organization. What approaches can help smaller CDMOs stand out to recruit and retain top candidates against big pharma?
Yeah, so it's difficult, right? But I think it all comes back to your employer value proposition. So what are you offering that would make somebody want to come work at your organization? My experience is that in smaller organizations, decisions get made faster. Those relational pieces are important, but performance is still pretty well known, right? Like in a smaller organization, you can't hide. So if you're a high performer, not to say that you never want to work at a larger organization, because that would be too broad of a brush, but I do think that there's something in the magic of knowing the people that you're working side by side with and feeling like you're working next to other high performers. And honestly, it's one of the greatest gifts that a high performer can receive, is to be surrounded by other high performers. It's really, really important for them. So your employer value proposition, the configuration might not look like big pharma or some of those other organizations where you have high compensation and stock options and all these, like, wonderful benefits, but maybe you have something to offer culturally that they can't, or maybe the flexibility that you have beats them or far exceeds them, or maybe you have really focused on performance and growing the organization, and that's exciting to somebody over just kind of being another cog in the giant wheel.
Yeah, great points. Awesome. And I know we're coming up on time here. If you just have a quick, second to just touch base on AI, and just a quick thought on that.
Yeah, so I don't typically use a lot of AI sourcing tools. Again, I have a lot of experience with making quick hiring decisions and doing that effectively. So like I have my own kind of like mental process that I go through to make sure that a candidate's going to be a quality candidate. But I think Alex shared a number of great resources that I'm definitely going to look up. I took some notes on those because I think they can, especially when you're reviewing a lot of resumes and trying to make a great hiring decision in a giant pool, that can speed things up dramatically.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I mean, even creating that 30, 60, 90-day plan, using a series of prompts to get to a great one could be good.
Yeah, great add on there, Alex. And everybody, I know we're getting to time here, and we would love if you follow us on LinkedIn. Also join our newsletter, for that way you can attend any of our future webinars and kind of see all the exciting things happening with Recognize. And if you do want to continue the conversation or have any additional questions, we have all our contact information here. We'll also drop those links in the chat for you as well. But thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.